Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Wine and Web3. I'm your host, Jana Kreilein, a certified wine geek and co-founder of dVIN Labs. I'm checking in today from scorching Dubai, where it's pushing 41 degrees Celsius, and the only thing hotter than the pavement is the energy at Token 2049. The events here are packed, the alpha is flowing, and the conversations around RWAs and on-chain infrastructure are louder than ever. Today's episode is all about how blockchain is transforming the economics of the wine business. And I'm sure I don't need to introduce my co-founder, David Garrett, who's been one of the key visionaries shaping the future of the $1 trillion wine asset class. In this episode, we're going to break down how blockchain addresses core challenges across the industry. So everything from supply chain inefficiencies to pricing opacity to the lack of direct connection between producers and consumers. This talk was originally recorded in September 2024 as part of one of our dWealth Learn to Earn webinars hosted by Dara Albright. Dara is the host of the Decent Millionaire podcast and the president of dWealth Education. We are resurfacing it today because it's more relevant than ever. In 2025, real-world assets are moving from theory to execution, a very exciting time. And wine, with its cultural gravity and deeply inefficient market structure, is one of the clearest, most compelling RWA opportunities on chain. So whether you're a builder, collector, producer, or just RWA curious, this one is worth every minute. Let's get into it.
All right, and we are live. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Dara Albright. I'm the founder of dWealth Education, and I'm so thrilled to be hosting today's webinar with David Garrett, the co-founder of dVIN Labs, the world's premier global wine club, which is transforming the investment-grade wine market through blockchain innovation. In today's session, David will be discussing how blockchain is being used to strengthen the economics of the wine business, as well as enable rare wine to grow into a $1 trillion asset class, because that's where we're headed. David will be covering what is dPIN, how it enables a secure and transparent custody, chain of custody, how wineries are using blockchain to mitigate foreign exchange risks, reduce costs, eliminate fraud, how blockchain will enable wine producers to reduce customer acquisition costs by over 90%, and how blockchain will provide a liquid marketplace for rare wine. Before we begin, though, I just want to give a quick shout out and congratulations to David and the dVIN team on all the recent accomplishments, including the very successful VIN token launch at the Breakpoint conference last week. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that and how that the token itself can play a role in the growth of the industry. And now for just some quick housekeeping, you will notice that there's a dashboard on the right side of your screen, on the upper right side of your screen. And there's a place where you could ask questions. You could just share your thoughts, share your insights. Feel free to do whatever you would like to do. On there's some emojis on the bottom. You could express your emotions through that as well as we're going on with the session. And just before we go officially into it, I just want to do one quick poll just to get an idea of who's with us today and why. So if you could please describe yourself and your main interest in today's session, or if you have multiple interests, you could describe what interests you most about the session today. But are you in the wine business? You looking to strengthen your business? Are you a collector or an investor looking to monetize your wine collection? Are you a wine consumer looking to capitalize on your wine drinking and consumption? Are you interested in just learning more about blockchain in general, its impact? Are you a financial professional or advisor looking to help your clients? And I'm just going to give a couple of people some time to answer some questions. Don't be shy. Keep them coming in. All right, it looks like we have a great range. We have a little bit of everything except other. So, all right, I'm going to close up that poll. Thank you all for participating in that. And with that, David, I'm going to let you take the stage.
Thank you so much, Dara. This is great. I really appreciate you inviting me here today. I apologize if I seem a little bit groggy. I just got back from Singapore. We had a great. I was there for about 10 days. We launched our token at Breakpoint, the Solana Breakpoint conference in Singapore on Saturday, and it's been kind of a whirlwind couple of weeks. So appreciate you inviting me here today, and really looking forward to talking about how the blockchain and Vincoin and the dVIN protocol can really help the wine industry to achieve digital transformation and prepare themselves for the next 1,000 years. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Dave Garrett. I'm the co-founder of dVIN Labs. Um, I my background is pretty simple. I was a tech guy in my 20s. I sold my company when I was 28 and dumped it into a vineyard and a winery in Argentina, and spent about 10, 12 years there building a really interesting project. I left that project in 2012, uh, moved to Hong Kong, worked in the wine business there, and for the last 10 years, I've been here in Spain, in Barcelona, and I'm a partner in a winery project here. Um, but over the last few years, in about 2020, I started getting some um, interesting calls from my winemaker friends who were asking me about blockchain. So I'm because I have a background in tech, and because most wine people, certainly winemakers, spend a lot more time outdoors and study different sciences. When they have a tech question, they call me, and so I was fielding a lot of calls from winemakers that were getting these sort of interesting and different proposals about how blockchain could help and change their business. And I guess in late 2020, we started a working group with myself and about 50 winemakers from around the world, winemakers, some other wine professionals, where we would invite in speakers. It was during the pandemic, so it was all virtual. We did these monthly Zoom meetings, and the more I learned about how blockchain worked, the more I saw applications inside the wine industry. And so we started as a working group. We then became a club, a little NFT club that was kind of popular at the time in 2021. Then we officially started a company. About a year ago, we launched a protocol, and last week we launched a token. So we've been really working on this for a long time. We've done pilot programs with about 70 different winemakers. We've tokenized about $2 million worth of wine in a private beta over the last couple of years, and now we're launched to the public. So what I'm gonna do today is just sort of walk you through what dVIN Labs is, what the dVIN protocol is, and mostly how Vincoin works, which is the token that we launched to help transform the wine industry. So I'm going to share my screen here. There we go. I knew I could figure it out. I am the tech guy after all. Um, so here, what I'm going to talk about is the dVIN protocol and VIN, or we call it Vincoin, and how that's unifying the $1 trillion wine asset class, and how we're solving three separate $10 billion problems in the industry. So the first thing to know about the wine industry is its size. A lot of people um, are very surprised when I tell them how big the wine industry is. So the wine industry every year has about $485 billion in turnover. If you want an analogy, that's about the same size as the airline industry. And if you look at other similar industries, discretionary spending, if you take the global film industry and the global television industry and the global music recording industry, and the global video game industry and the global publishing industry, and you add them all together, it's still not as big as the global wine industry. People spend a lot more money on wine than they do on most of their other discretionary spending combined. It's a very, very popular product. What we're really focused in on, and it's also a very old product, right? It's wine's been around for about 4,000 years. Even just the last 1,000 years, it's been a real industry. It's one of the oldest industries in the world. And if you look at where we're focused is just the luxury industry, which is wines that are like $50 a bottle, average $50 a bottle, which is wines that cost somewhere between, let's say on the very low end, $30 to $35, and on the high end, reaching up to $3,000, $5,000, even $10,000 a bottle. So you're looking at wines that are kind of special, expensive wines. It's a very small percent of the volume. About 1% of the wines in the world are considered luxury wines, but it's a large percent of the turnover. It's about $100 billion a year. It's a pretty big business. And what's interesting about that business is that unlike almost every other industry in the world, the wine business over the last 30 years has not had consolidation or digital transformation. Now, if you think about it, and you've probably seen these images pop up in your news feed, right? Where there's a screen that has like 100 different food brands on it, but you realize that they're owned by like 5 or 6 different companies. Same with banking, same with retail, same with energy, same with finance. There's been, across the world, and especially in consumer products, there's been significant consolidation over the course of the last 30 years. And one of the reasons for that is the internet. The internet has enabled businesses to, when they do vertically and horizontally integrate, to have better data, have a source of data where they can make smart decisions, right? That's what digital transformation is all about, right? Businesses that used to operate in like an oasis or in a stovepipe, now because they're connected to a lot of other businesses in the same industry, they can share data, and that data provides business intelligence, and the business intelligence allows them to operate significantly more efficiently and more profitably. So, to give you an example, just even in the same industry, Smirnoff, the CMO of Smirnoff, when he wakes up in the morning, he can look at his laptop and see how many bottles of vodka were sold in the Walmart in Indianapolis yesterday morning, right? And that's called a depletion report. And because he can see that depletion report, he or she can see that depletion report, what that means is that they can know a lot of things. They can know how effective their marketing is. They can know how effective their messaging is. They can know how effective their packaging is. They can know to a large degree what kind of demographics are buying their product. They can know how efficient their supply chain is. They can know, hey, if you're buying more, if more vodka is being sold in Indianapolis and less is being sold in Atlanta, then I'm going to send more vodka to Indianapolis and less to Indiana. It allows them to have, more just-in-time shipping, just-in-time production, and really allows them to have a much more efficient and much more profitable business. The wine industry, because it's so decentralized, it's so atomized, doesn't have any of that. So you look at, the food industry, the top 100 or 120 brands are owned by just 5 companies. In the wine business, it's the opposite. There are 30,000 tiny independent winemakers around the world that make luxury wine. And there's also about 10 million tiny independent middlemen. And when you think about it, that makes sense, right? Like if you go into a wine shop or you're a fancy restaurant, and you're buying a $50 bottle of wine or a $100 bottle of wine, you're not buying it at Walmart. You're not buying it at Target. You're buying it at the little wine shop on the corner that's probably independently run and has been in the same family since Prohibition. and they probably keep their inventory on a clipboard. The same as the little restaurant around the corner, right? If you're buying an expensive bottle of wine, it's not at Dave and Buster's. It's at your favorite little Italian restaurant around the corner, your little favorite little French restaurant. And again, they probably don't have advanced computer systems that are allowing them to share data up the supply chain. And what that means is that the winemaker really has no access to data. They have no business intelligence. And it means that when they're making decisions about everything from product development to product mix to marketing, messaging, packaging, to supply chain efficiency, they don't have any information about consumption data. They don't have any idea who their consumers are. And it's very difficult for them to put a loyalty program in place. So they don't have, because they don't have that data, it's made it very difficult for them to achieve the same levels of profitability as other businesses, as other industries. And so the wine industry has really lagged far behind with regards to digital transformation, efficiency, and profitability. So, that's created a bunch of kind of unique problems in the wine industry. That by tokenizing wine, it creates some really interesting solutions. So, when I talk about tokenizing wine, what does that really mean? And the very simple explanation for it is you're turning wine from a possession into an asset. So when you think about other assets, other kind of things that you own, the assets that are the things that are considered to be assets, the thing that distinguishes them from other things is that they have a deed of ownership, right? The asset has some sort of deed of ownership, whether that's your on the very large end, your house or your car, or stocks or bonds or diamonds or Bitcoin or whatever it is. There is a ledger that says who owns that asset. And with wine, they don't have that ledger. And what that means is that wine there's really developed a wide array of problems over the course of the last 30 years in the industry that don't really have a solution. One of them, or they don't, that haven't had a solution yet, but that dVIN, the dVIN protocol and Bitcoin solves. So the biggest problem, or one of the biggest problems for the very, very high end investment grade wines, and if you've ever seen the movie Sour Grapes, you probably know a lot about this, but is authenticity, verification, and provenance. So authenticity is, if that wine is fake, you're talking about anti-fraud, anti-counterfeit protection, and it's a really big problem in the wine industry because a bottle of wine is as valuable as the label, is as valuable as people think it is, and if you can fake that label, you can make a lot of money. In the movie Sour Grapes, you see the kind of antagonist in that movie counterfeits very, very expensive multi-$1,000 bottles of wine. And at the end of the movie, you find out that he's counterfeited almost $50 million worth of wine. And that's a big deal. And that's kind of interesting. And, people buying $1,000 bottles. But where the anti-fraud and anti-counterfeit really is a problem is, companies like Penfolds, where in 2020, when they left the Chinese market, they estimated that there was more counterfeit Penfolds in China than there was real Penfolds in China. So counterfeit wine is a big problem, and it's been a multi-billion-dollar problem for many years. And by tokenizing wine, by creating a deed of ownership where you can track the wine through the supply chain, that really solves that problem. It solves the problem. It creates a lot of negative incentives against counterfeit, and it creates an ecosystem of trust where that bottle is authentic. You can track it all the way back to the winemaker. Supply chain efficiency, really important. Right now in the wine business, there's really no way for winemakers to know where their wines are in the world. And because of that, and because they don't know where consumption is happening, they really don't have an ability to have an efficient supply chain. And when you think about wine as an international business with a very limited supply, that's a real problem. Because if you're a winemaker and you only make 10,000 cases of wine a year, and you send 1,000 case, you send a little bit, you send too much wine to Seoul, South Korea, and not enough wine to Sao Paulo, Brazil. Well, if you're a beer manufacturer, or if you're or a distiller of vodka, and you don't have enough wine you don't send enough wine to Sao Paulo, then you just make more, right? It's fairly simple. You make more vodka and you send it off to Sao Paulo. But in the wine industry, if you're wrong about the supply chain and you send too much to one country and not enough to the other, you can't solve that problem, because wine is you're really limited in the amount of wine that you can make every year. There's only a certain number of grapes that you have. There's only a certain You're limited by both geography and usually by the local regulatory agency. So you can only make so much wine a year, and if you send too much of it to one place and not enough to the other, that's not a problem that you can resolve. So you just end up leaving money on the table. And again, it's a huge problem, and it means that the winemakers end up leaving money on the table, end up having an inefficient business, and it's a problem that can be solved. We can talk about loyalty and customer engagement and customer acquisition. So, typically when you drink a great bottle of wine, it was made 10 years ago by somebody 10,000 miles away. And what that means is that there's very little connection between the winemaker and the wine consumer, because it's so far away, and it was so long ago. That disconnect means that winemakers aren't getting the kind of direct and immediate feedback that almost every other industry gets from their consumers. There's an interesting aspect of wine as well, in that consumption and purchase are typically separated with luxury wine, because when you buy most other products, let's say you buy a T-shirt, right? You can wear it the next day, or if you buy a car, you can drive it home off the lot, or if you buy an avocado, maybe you'll wait 2 days to eat it. But with wine, when you purchase a bottle of luxury wine, you might wait a year, 2 years, 3 years before you drink that wine. So purchase and consumption are separated. And because of that, it makes it even more difficult for winemakers to understand how their product is being consumed, who's consuming it, and how to make their businesses more efficient, more profitable. We can also talk about inefficient investment in trading. So we've been talking a lot about the luxury wine industry, which is about, like I said, about $100 billion a year. The investment grade wine industry is about $10 billion a year. It's a very big business. It's about $300 billion in investment grade wine in the world. It's a very big asset class, but it's very, very it's very difficult to break into. It's a very exclusive investment market. And the way you know that is because if I asked you, anybody listening today, to invest $100,000 in real estate, or $100,000 in stocks or bonds or gold or diamonds or Bitcoin or any other alternative asset, even luxury cars or luxury watches, you would probably be able to do it in about 10 minutes on your phone. It's very, very simple to do. You can look at the investment criteria, you can look at price history, you can look at liquidity, and you can make a decision about purchasing any of those kind of investment grade assets that I just talked about. But if I gave you $100,000 and said invest $100,000 in investment grade wine, most people watching today wouldn't be able to do it. Not just in 10 minutes, you probably wouldn't be able to do it in a week. At least not with the same criteria that you would use to invest in any other asset. And that's because the wine industry is very opaque. Very opaque. You don't know. You don't really have any information on price history. You don't know about liquidity. You don't know when transactions are happening or at what price level. It's very hard to understand provenance. And it's very hard to kind of break into investing in investment grade wine. It's very difficult. By tokenizing wine, that really opens up, decentralized marketplaces. It opens up, full transparency into both pricing and transactions, and I think creates a much more fair and democratic, and I think a much larger marketplace for trading in investment grade wine. And then finally, we talk about sustainability, and which is a super important point. If if you don't have access to supply chain data, if you don't know where your bottles are in the world, it's very hard to know what the impact is, what the environmental impact is, of those bottles moving around. And with winemakers especially, winemakers are particularly sensitive to climate change and to thinking about environmental impact, and so they really want, and wine lovers as well, they really want to be able to have sustainable and ethical practices, but because the industry is so opaque, they're really not able to. So tokenization really solves a lot of those problems. Um, I'm not going to go through all of the milestones that we've had at dVIN. I kind of talked a little bit through it before, but we've had a really fun run for the last 3 years, and we're very excited to be now available to the public with a publicly traded token, and the ability to help any winery start tokenizing their wine. And we have a lot of great plans for this year and beyond. As I said, last week at Solana Breakpoint, we launched on stage. We actually brought a bottle of wine with a VIN coin airdrop attached for all of the attendees. So we kind of gave everybody a way to participate in our launch, everyone that was there at Breakpoint. And I just got back, and we had a really great time. We launched with a lot of great partners. We worked closely with Jupiter Exchange, with the Solana and the Solana Foundation, and then a bunch of other kind of smaller groups, from the Mad Lads to Wormhole to Sharkify, and a bunch of other really great groups that we worked with there. Had a really wonderful time at Breakpoint. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific here. As we were putting together the dVIN protocol, which is a series of smart contracts and mechanisms to put really any bottle of wine on the blockchain, and then also talking about VinCoin, which is the kind of incentive token or the incentive currency to incentivize broad adoption of VinCoin, or broad adoption of the dVIN protocol and tokenization in the marketplace. We really started looking at it, and we divided the benefits, or we divided the demand, what we call the demand cycles, into 3 big buckets. Because we really think that the luxury wine industry, we've talked about it, it's $100 billion a year industry. But because it hasn't had that consolidation and digital transformation over the course of the last 30 years, like nearly every other business, we think they're leaving about $30 billion on the table. Digital transformation has created significant efficiencies, significant profitability in other consumer products industries, whereas in luxury wine, it hasn't done that. We think that we've identified 3 separate $10 billion problems that tokenization and VinCoin can solve. And I'm going to kind of walk you through those really quickly. The first is consumption data and customer acquisition. So the way we've designed it is actually really simple. Winemakers buy VinCoin. They attach VinCoin to each bottle of wine. That bottle goes through the supply chain. And when the consumer opens the bottle, there's a transaction that happens. The consumer gets the VIN coin in exchange for the winemaker knowing when and where that bottle was opened. And if the consumer opts in, they get customer acquisition data. So let's talk about why that's important, right? So right now, winemakers have no idea when their bottles are being opened, where they're being consumed, who's consuming them, and customer acquisition is incredibly expensive. So let's start with the data part, right? So any business, and I know that a lot of people that listen to these are entrepreneurs, or people that analyze businesses. And I'll tell you, anyone who has run a business or analyzes businesses for a financial institution knows that data is the core of any smart decision making, of any of any business decision making for any industry. And if you don't have that data, then you're flying blind. And so what we think that winemakers getting that consumption data gives them the ability to have significantly more efficient businesses, more efficient product development, more efficient product mix, meaning how much of their expensive wine, how much of their medium wine, how much of their more approachable wine, more efficient marketing and messaging, more efficient packaging, more efficient supply chains. We talked about that earlier. But where the rubber really hits the road is when you talk about customer acquisition and loyalty. And that's important for a couple of different reasons. The most important is customer acquisition. So winemakers, nobody listening or nobody watching this webinar today has ever seen an advertisement for luxury wine. You might have seen an advertisement for $2 Chuck, or maybe if you're a subscriber to Wine Enthusiast magazine or Wine Spectator magazine, maybe you've seen an advertisement for luxury wine, but probably not. And that's because winemakers don't advertise on television. They don't advertise on the radio or on billboards because it's not really very efficient. And they're not allowed to advertise on social media. So you've never seen an ad on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or Facebook for luxury wine. So when you think about that, like a business, a consumer products business that isn't allowed to advertise, well, how do they get new customers? It's very, very difficult and very expensive. In Napa Valley last year, the average cost to acquire a new customer was $450. Incredibly expensive. Now, however, the reason that makes sense is because loyalty is super important in the wine industry, and we kind of chalk that up a little bit to the tyranny of choice, right? When you walk into a wine shop or when you look at a wine list at a restaurant, you're sort of overwhelmed with choice, right? There are even at a grocery store, you have if there's a row of or an aisle of wine, there's hundreds and hundreds of different labels, and they're all the same size, the same shape, the same weight, and they only have this little patch of paper on the front to kind of try to tell their story. So you're sort of overwhelmed with choice when it comes to wine. We've talked about 30,000 independent winemakers around the world. How do you know what to drink? Well, as soon as you find loyalty really plays a big role in this, because as soon as you find a wine that you like, where you know the story behind the winemaker, you know that you like that wine, you know that it's something that you're going to enjoy, you typically will buy it over and over again for years. So typically when in Napa Valley, for example, if you acquired a new customer in Napa Valley, it might cost you $450 to acquire that customer, but that customer will typically spend somewhere around $4,400 with you over 38 months. So they become a long-term customer. It's really important to acquire new customers, but there's no really real efficient way to do it. So using VinCoin, by tokenizing each bottle and using VinCoin as a loyalty point, you're able to not only collect all of that great consumption data, but winemakers are also able to acquire new customers very inexpensively. what we're talking about with the winemakers that we work with is just $5 or $10 worth of VIN coin on a bottle gives them the ability to acquire customers at a very rapid pace and significantly less expensively than really any other method. So that's the first, what we think is $10 billion problem in the wine industry that we're tackling and launching right away. We've already tokenized thousands and tens of thousands of bottles of wine with tens of thousands or millions of VIN coin attached. And we're growing more every day, working directly with winemakers, working directly with retailers. And you're going to start seeing more and more tokenized wine if you're a wine lover. The second, and this is kind of how it works. Winemakers embed VIN coin on each bottle. The consumers claim the VIN coin. And then there's another kind of cool and interesting piece to this, which is, unless you're a professional like me, you really shouldn't drink a whole bottle of wine by yourself. You should share it with friends. And we've developed one of the mechanisms that we've developed as part of tokenizing the bottle is that when you open the bottle, you can actually not only get VIN coin for yourself, which comes with status and rewards from the winery, but you can also share it with the other people that you're sharing that bottle with. And that creates kind of a viral way for winemakers to acquire new customers. There's no one that's a more likely new customer for a winemaker than someone who's just tried their wine for the first time. So we've really focused on building a way to connect winemakers and wine lovers at the moment of consumption. And then the consumer can then take that VIN coin that they receive for opening the bottle in exchange for that data, and they can spend it on more wine or experiences and build stats. So that's the first $10 billion problem. How do we solve customer acquisition, consumer data, and loyalty? The second $10 billion problem is provenance. So most people know that wine, especially luxury wine, needs to be stored and transported with the proper temperature and humidity conditions, or it'll spoil. You've probably all everyone that's listening, if you like wine, you order wine at a restaurant, the wine comes and they'll pour that little taste for you, and you'll smell it, and you'll be like, this is off, it's not right, and that wine gets poured out. Well, as it turns out, that's about 1 in 10 bottles ends up being a bad bottle, ends up being spoiled, ends up being corked, and ends up being thrown away. And in $100 billion industry, that's a $10 billion problem. And that problem mostly ends up accruing to the little restaurant owner, the little wine shop owner, or even sometimes to the consumer. And that's a big problem, and that's a problem that can be solved relatively easily. Now, for a long time, people have been trying to solve that problem with a centralized solution, meaning how can we create a way to track bottles, track that the temperature and humidity conditions as that bottle moves its way through the supply chain. But because the supply chain is so atomized, 10 million independent middlemen, it was always impossible for any one player, for any centralized player, to create a system that will track or monitor bottles on their way through the supply chain. However, blockchain, and this is a very new thing just in the last couple of years, has enabled a new technology that we call dPIN, which is a decentralized physical infrastructure network. And what that means is, instead of one company owning all of owning the entire system for tracking wine, it allows each individual node along the supply chain to be part of a big network, and to be rewarded for sharing just the information in their little island or in their little oasis. So we've partnered with and taken actually a strategic investment from the inventors of RFID. So RFID technology it's that same technology where You go to the Amazon store and you put all your stuff in the shopping cart and you just walk out the door. And as you're going through the door, it analyzes everything in your cart and charges your credit card. That's RFID, and it's a wireless technology that's really good for tracking individual items. A lot of times it's used in theft prevention, but it's used in a lot of different ways. For a dPIN, the way that we're looking at it is each individual bottle of wine has an RFID tag, so it's identified with a unique tag. And as that bottle moves through the supply chain, whether it's into or out of a warehouse, into or out of a temperature controlled truck or a temperature controlled shipping container, or into its final destination at a restaurant or a wine shop, and then even on to a final consumer, that each step along the way, there can be an independently owned RFID interrogator. That's what the reader is called, that can update the blockchain entry, the ledger entry for each individual bottle of wine with location, temperature, and humidity conditions. Now, what that does is it creates a record for each bottle. Now, the question is, how do you pay for it, right? How do you pay this giant network of RFID interrogators? Well, the way that we're looking at it is that VIN coin attached to each bottle can make a micropayment every time that bottle goes through a warehouse or a temperature controlled shipping container or a temperature controlled truck, or even to the final destination, wine shop or restaurant. And then even when it goes to the consumer, everywhere along that chain, the independent player can be paid, even if it's just 10 cents a bottle, to update the location and conditions of that bottle. So at the end of the road, the retailer or the wine shop or even the consumer can scan that bottle and see the entire chain of custody, all the way from the winemaker to the consumer, or what we say from grape to glass. And by looking at that information, by seeing the temperature and humidity conditions of the location, they're able to get like the big green thumbs up or maybe the red thumbs down, and they get to know whether or not that bottle was taken care of or was properly stored and transported. And that will what that will do is create incentives all the way through the supply chain to have proper provenance. And we think that not only saves the industry $10 billion a year, but more importantly, it saves a lot of great wine from being poured down the drain. And I'm all for that. So how that works, really simple. Between the winery and the consumer, that wine usually has many hops. In each hop, a little bit of money, a little microtransaction in VIN coin pays for the location and temperature, humidity conditions to be updated on that bottle. So by the time you get to the end, that bottle's authentic. You can see the chain of custody, and you can see the provenance of that bottle. Now, there's a third $10 billion problem in the wine industry. And that to me is actually one of the most interesting problems, and also a problem that really the blockchain was sort of invented to solve. So when you think about international transactions, what you typically think about is one Fortune 500 company buying $5 million worth of raw materials from another Fortune 500 company, right? It's a big transaction. It's, a full container full of, sugar or parts or whatever. And those transactions are safe and cheap and efficient. And they've become safe and cheap and efficient over the course of the last 30 years. It's very simple to send products overseas. But when you think about the wine industry, and because it's so atomized, instead of the typical international transaction being, a big company buying $5 million worth of wine, it's actually a little tiny winery in France sending 5 cases of wine to a little tiny importer in Norway. And instead of a $5 million transaction, that's a $2,000 transaction. And that transaction, instead of over the last 20 years becoming more and more efficient, it's actually becoming significantly less efficient. So that little $2,000 transaction has a bunch of problems. The big, number one problem is counterparty risk, right? Instead of two big players with a big amount of money where there's recourse if you send the wrong thing or you make a mistake or someone doesn't send the money, you can sue them because for $5 million, it makes sense. But when you have two little players, like, how do I know you're going to send me the money? How do I know you're going to send me the wine? And if you don't, what am I going to do about it? Am I really going to hire a lawyer to sue you for $2,000? Probably not. So there's real counterparty risk in those transactions. There's also huge fees. The winemaker, the importer, when they're sending the money back, they're probably paying, the same international wire fee as that $5 million transaction. But on a $2,000 transaction, it's taking a pretty big bite out of every bottle. On the other side, with the winemaker, they probably, because they're a small company, they don't have the ability to negotiate better rates with their bank. So not only are they suffering through long international wire settlement delays, but they're also paying the worst possible FX rate. So when you add all of those things up, we did a little study with Deloitte last year. On a $50 bottle of wine, about $6.10 is just going to risk and banks, which means that when you open a great bottle of wine, the first glass that you pour goes to your banker. And we don't think that makes very much sense. We think that there's many, many more efficient ways. And when you think about the blockchain and what it was created to solve, this counterparty risk, that's a smart contract. If you've got a smart contract that defines the transaction and automatically makes payment, that really gets rid of counterparty risk. If you have digital currencies that settle in 2 seconds instead of 5 days and provide the very best FX rate versus the worst, that solves if it's $6.10, if it's 12% of every bottle of wine, and it's $100 billion industry, that's another $10 billion problem that we can solve with by just using simple blockchain and digital transactions. So that's kind of the last problem that we're looking to solve. And just to make sure that everybody knows, we don't think that any of these problems get solved by stodgy old winemakers or stodgy old wine consumers getting a MetaMask wallet and buying a bunch of crypto. Like, we don't think that's what happens. And in fact, if you look at the consumer app that we've developed, dVIN.app, it looks a lot more like your Delta SkyMiles app than it does like any kind of crypto app. And on the winemaker side, we're not really looking to bring the winemakers into Web3. We're looking at plugging Web3 into the existing winemaker systems. So, using an API to plug into their existing accounting systems, their existing ERP systems, their loyalty systems, or their loyalty platforms, or even their direct-to-consumer sales platforms. Just plugging Web3 into it. So they're doing things the same way that they've been doing it for years, but more efficiently, less expensively, more profitably, by using Web3 components. When the winemaker is going into the accounting system to create the invoice for that little importer in Norway, instead of creating a paper invoice that they email, they're building a smart contract. And the little importer in Norway, instead of connecting their bank using Plaid, they're using an on-ramp system that we've developed with Deloitte and Amazon Managed Blockchain and Fireblocks. And they don't even know that they're using digital currencies. But what they do know is that everything's cheaper, everything's faster, everything's more efficient, and everything has less risk. So those are the three big $10 billion problems. loyalty and customer acquisition and consumer data. The second is provenance that we're solving with dPIN, and the third is DeFi, is making international transactions easier and faster. And the added benefit of that is by turning wine from a possession into an asset. Now you also have the ability to access all kinds of other DeFi DeFi protocols or DeFi benefits. For example, one of the things that I get talked about that people ask me about the most is creating credit facilities. So now I know when they think about it, they think, man, I'd love to be able to go to a wine collector that has a $500,000 collection and let them borrow against that wine collection. And if it's tokenized and we have transparent pricing and transparent liquidity, it's very easy to create a credit facility for a wine collector to borrow against their $500,000 or $1 million wine collection. But where it starts to get really interesting is winemakers themselves, right? So in Barolo, in Piemonte in Italy, in a very, very small region, though by local regulation, the winemakers need to age their wine for 4 years in barrel and then 4 years in bottle before they're allowed to sell it. That's 8 years worth of inventory that every winemaker has in their cellar. Well, instead of being an asset, because they're not allowed to sell it and they're required to store it, that 8 years worth of inventory is a liability. But if it was tokenized, now they can borrow against it for operating operating cash requirements. They can sell futures. They can hedge against it. I can only imagine all of the DeFi products that will be created for winemakers to use to make their businesses more efficient as soon as their main asset is tokenized. So we're really excited about that. I'm gonna talk about so this is how those international transactions work. I talked a little bit about how VinCoin works, that consumers earn VIN by opening the bottles. I've talked a little bit about consumption data and how it works very similar to Air Miles. In fact, comparing our app to the Delta Sky Miles app. We have all these fun little slogans: uncork to earn VIN. Winemakers, again, to recap, winemakers buy VinCoin. They attach VinCoin to billions of bottles a year. And when the consumer opens the VinCoin, that's where there's that transaction where the winemaker gets data, the consumer earns VinCoin for opening bottles of wine and sharing with friends. And in the long run, they get to use that VinCoin to buy more wine, to buy experiences, to pay for experiences, to increase their status with the winemaker. Got a bunch of great partners. I know I've talked about a bunch of these before. These are some of our early winery partners that we've done projects with. Talk a little about tokenomics if you're interested in that. Working with Solana, we're very, very excited to be working on the Solana platform. A little bit about our team, and that's about it for today. So I've been talking for something like 45 minutes straight. I'm gonna stop and invite Dara back on, and maybe we can use the last few minutes to answer questions.
Sure, that was a great presentation. There were so many things in there that I found so interesting. I took so many notes, but what I thought was so interesting was that you said that you're not looking to you're not looking to bring winemakers into Web3. You're looking to plug Web3 into the existing wine industry infrastructure. And why I think that's so interesting, because I think that is what every industry on the planet should be focusing on and doing right now. That's, I think, the solution. So that was so interesting. So David, a couple of questions coming in. I guess you could see from the screen here. Christine can you, if you want to take those. I see Christine had some questions come in, if you want to look at that one there.
Sure. I
Measuring
I think I'm in the
KPI.
wrong place. I didn't get to see the questions. I can't find them.
Oh, okay. So would you
Sorry.
say this is a better way to measure KPI at the vintner site?
Oh, 100%. I mean, they don't have like really the winemakers. They don't have any performance indicators at all. They just don't know. I mean, they how they judge it right now is maybe by scores, maybe a little bit by sales, but they really don't have a way to measure how they're performing at the consumer level. They just they don't have any visibility into that, and because of that, what dVIN protocol and what VinCoin can provide them with is instant feedback, instant feedback from consumers, and tons of data that when they assemble that data gives them smart business intelligence for how they can not only measure how they're doing but also chart a more profitable, more efficient course for the future.
It's great. So I think, David, what's really important, how could people get in touch and start to work with dVIN? How, where do they find you? How could they download the app? Where could they look and research the token? All that great stuff.
So dvinlabs.com. Go check out dvinlabs.com. That's kind of the easiest way to find us. You can also find us on X at dvinlabs. And that's probably the easiest way. Anyone can always you'll be able to find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. You can find me there. I'm pretty easy to find, and always happy when people reach out with questions.
And what we have, Stuart just asked a question. How will this impact the 3-tier distribution system?
Well, I think the most important thing it'll do is it'll give winemakers more leverage. So winemakers right now, they don't really have, because they don't have data, they don't really have any leverage in their negotiations with distributors or with importers. And because of that, winemakers of all luxury products, they probably make they probably have the least margins, and they have the smallest margins and the smallest profitability. But by not only connecting winemakers with wine lovers so that they have better feedback, they know where their customers are, they know when their product is being consumed, they have more leverage with winemakers. They know where the demand is coming from, right? So that allows them to I think make a little bit more money. The average winemaker for let's say $100 bottle of wine, the average winemaker makes between $12 and $18 from that $100 bottle of wine. It's actually the middlemen that make more money than the winemaker, and they do that in large part by and make this. I don't want to ascribe intent, but the data is obscured. Partially, that's because there isn't a lot of technology, but another reason is because the middlemen, they jealously guard their connection with the consumer, and what I think is that at the end of the day, wine is a luxury product. Wine is all about experience, and wine lovers are going to have better experiences when they have a closer connection to the winemaker. I know that's true for me, and it's been true for 25 years everywhere I've been in the industry. So creating those connections, I think, not only makes it more profitable, more efficient for the winemakers, but creates better experiences for wine lovers.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you mentioned out of the $100, I'm curious, how much of that do you think is allocated towards marketing and trying to acquire the customer?
Well, not very much. Winemakers they just don't have any avenues, right? They're not allowed to spend money on advertising. They don't really. There's, most winemakers, their advertising budget is zero. Literally zero. Their marketing budget usually amounts to just, a little bit of, their packaging is really important. They spend some money on packaging. Sometimes they spend some money on retail, like, placement and stuff like that. Most of the marketing money that winemakers spend is traveling around the world and doing winemaker dinners. And so VinCoin and the dVIN protocol, that's a great way to get invited to a winemaker dinner, right? The more VinCoin you have, the more digital corks you've opened, the more tasting tokens you have, the more you can prove to a winemaker that you're a good customer. You get that status, you get invited to winemaker dinners. And I got to tell you, I've been in the business 25 years. I've been to a lot of winemaker dinners, and everyone is special. They usually bring great wine. It's usually great food. I highly recommend, if you ever get invited to a dinner with a winemaker, don't pass it up.
That's great. Well, and that brings us exactly at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, David. This was really incredible, so informative. Yes, for everyone, it has been recorded. So we will be sharing the link with you following the webinar. You'll probably get that probably sometime tomorrow, which you could rewatch this, take notes, share with friends, and we'll have also all of David's contact information in that follow-up email as well, so you guys could all connect. Looking forward to seeing this industry top the $1 trillion point. So it's amazing.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Dara. I really, really appreciate it. This is great as usual, and really fun to do.
All right, that's it for this episode of Wine and Web 3. Huge thanks to Dara Albright of dWealth Education for hosting the original conversation. And of course to Dave for laying out the clear vision of how blockchain is reshaping the economics of the wine industry. If this episode sparked something for you, please go ahead and follow the show, subscribe, and leave a quick review. It really helps us bring more people into this conversation around culture, capital, and what's coming next. You can find us on socials under the handle at dVIN Labs. That's dVIN Labs, LAVS, everywhere. And check out everything we're building at dvinlabs.com. Until next time, stay curious and keep sipping smart. Cheers.